Mate 40 here. I got to ask you a question for a friend of mine. Do you ever get up in the morning, start taking your supplements, taking your meds, and then you forget whether or not you took your modafinil? And so just to be sure, just to be on the safe side, you take two, perhaps. Well, you don't take two, you take one, but then after you've taken it, you start to think, I think I took two modafinil today, and really I'm only supposed to take one, and then you just feel great. I mean, you feel, wow! I mean, amazing. Like, you start to see patterns, and you start to penetrate the mysteries of the universe, and you have confidence, and you have healthy curiosity, and maybe it was just that extra modafinil. Now, have you ever felt like you were sleepwalking through life, and then you receive the attention of a pretty young woman, and suddenly you go from sleepy and sleepwalking to alive, and everything's more vivid, and the colors, aren't they bright, and you're able to distinguish between 17 different colors of blue, and your life suddenly filled with meaning and purpose. I mean, do you ever worry if perhaps I am too extrinsically motivated? Perhaps I need to become more intrinsically motivated? I'm just wondering if I'm just too intrinsically motivated. I mean, have you gone through life and you felt like you're just sleepwalking through life and nothing was giving you meaning and passion and purpose, and then you saw the opportunity to make money, and then you suddenly became alive and you got excited, and then all of your life started working simply because you saw the opportunity to make money? I mean, that's not very spiritual, is it? Why am I not excited about everything that there is to learn in the Talmud? Why is there not enough in the Torah to keep me excited? Why do I need to lean on these extrinsic rewards? I mean, what is it about things outside of me, situations, opportunities, conquest, conquering? Why is that so thrilling for me? Is there not enough of a thrill for me in conquering just a simple page of Talmud? Why do I need to look outside of the Talmud to feel excited? It just seems so incredibly shallow. I'm not sufficiently motivated by the opportunity to help people. Why am I not sufficiently motivated just being of service, just being a worker among workers? Why am I not sufficiently motivated to be excited about the attention of a healthy, strong woman my own age, right? A strong, confident woman my own age who can challenge me and help me become more mature and who calls me on my nonsense. Why can't I get as excited about a woman my own age as opposed to a woman in her 20s? Am I a bad man? Because sometimes I feel like I'm just way too extrinsically motivated. I mean, why am I not just sufficiently excited for the opportunity to talk live here on YouTube to 4 people? Why do I need any more than that? Right? Why do I need more than just one person listening to me rant and rave? Right? Why? Why am I seeking these extrinsic rewards? I mean, this is not the true path of Torah. I sometimes feel like I haven't truly understood the path of Torah, and I am just getting pulled and pushed and prodded and thrust and led down the garden pathway by all these pretty young things, by fame, sleepwalking through life, and then 60 Minutes called, or sleepwalking through life, and then Rolling Stone called, or oh, I had the opportunity to be on the cover of this magazine or this newspaper. Why would that excite me? Why is there not enough in the sacred text to keep me excited? Why is there not enough for me in just a simple life of service, of simply being a worker among workers, just an ordinary bloke, just fulfilling my duty, being a good neighbor, being a productive member of my community, cleaning my shul, bringing meals to the shut-ins? But why do I need these extrinsic rewards of fame and fortune and fornication, God forbid? don't I realize how lacking in spiritual sustenance the pursuit of fame, fortune, and fornication is? Haven't I learned by now at age 58 how empty that will leave me feeling inside? And to think that these worldly goods, that these common preoccupations, that somehow that flips a switch inside of me, and I suddenly get excited and feel like, oh, now I'm living. Now I feel alive. Now I feel energized. Why does it take 2 modafinil? Like, why am I not simply content with just 1 modafinil? I probably took it. Why did I have to push it and take that extra modafinil? I mean, what is it about money or a beautiful young woman or the opportunities for status or fame or feeling really important in this particular situation? Oh, I can make a contribution here. Why not just be a worker among workers? Why not just settle down at the assembly line and do what tens of thousands of other people do? Why am I chasing these external sources of meaning and comfort and esteem? Why can't I just go deep inside and meditate and pray? Why can't I just simply be excited about davening at shul, saying the same prayers that I've already said 10,000 times? But why is the opportunity to say a particular prayer 10,001 times? Why is that not sufficient motivation for me? I remember I was all sullen at this dinner party. I was invited to a dinner party by this young woman. I'd shown up to interview her boss, who was a movie producer, and he wasn't there. He'd forgotten the appointment. And so the young woman, who was his secretary, she took a liking to me, and she invited me to this dinner party. And I'm just all quiet and restrained, and God forbid, perhaps I was even a little bit sullen. But then for dessert, they brought out the mango pie, and I just changed personality. I just came alive. It's like, whoa! I mean, why is it that like a nice round of golf or a great mango dessert or a lemon sherbet, and suddenly I come alive? I mean, why must my happiness be in the hands of the Dallas Cowboys and all these extrinsic, Goyish preoccupations? Is there not enough in the sacred text to keep me excited? That I mean, why can't I just look deep inside? My God. All right. I'm incredibly excited today because I got my hands on a 40-page essay from Rony Guldmann. All right. The author of Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression. And I'll pull up his website here. His professors at Stanford were the parents of Samson Bankman-Fried. So I've had Rony on my show many times. I want to have him back to discuss these lofty issues. He wrote the memoir, The Star Chamber of Stanford, on the secret trial and invisible persecution of a Stanford law fellow. Read this harrowing account of the author's gaslighting at the hands of Silicon Valley elites Joseph Bankman and Barbara Fried, Stanford law professors and the progenitors of disgraced FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried. I love this book, right? Might be mad, bad, and dangerous to know, but I want to read more from this author. I keep getting valuable new insights and tremendous entertainment value as I read and reread. Within 20 minutes of opening my Kindle, I had received joy that greatly exceeded the $8.49 purchase price. I expect I'll be wrestling with arguments in this book for many months to come. I plan to read his other works, such as Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression and The Critical Theory of Academia, a book unlike any I have ever read. So I got my hands on a new essay by Rony Guldmann, and it's called The Twin Pathologies of Fat Acceptance and Anti-Vax Conspiracism. So this is worth treating on a sentence-by-sentence basis. Sweetgreen CEO Jonathan Neiman sparked a firestorm in October 2021 when he posted on LinkedIn that Americans haven't been paying enough attention to obesity's role in aggravating COVID's dangers for the populace. While endorsing the COVID vaccines, Neiman seemed to downplay their overall helpfulness as public health measures, lamenting that COVID is here to stay for the foreseeable future because no vaccine nor mask will save us. So having abandoned these false hopes, Neiman recommended focusing on the root cause of many Americans' susceptibility to COVID's worst outcomes, our unhealthy lifestyles. and specifically ever-rising rates of obesity, suggesting that with government health mandates now de rigueur, we might consider taxing processed food and refined sugar to pay for the impact of the pandemic and to incentivize health. And how did this go over? Right? Do you think people were happy about this commentary? No, not really. Not so happy. This social commentary drew sharp rebuke from progressives who condemned Neiman for fat shaming. Right? Fat shaming is about the worst thing you can do, devaluing the vaccines and blaming obesity on individual lifestyle choices rather than larger socioeconomic inequalities. Neiman later apologized for his insensitivity on these fronts, while apparently standing by his larger message that obesity is a grave public health threat and the driving force behind many COVID-related hospitalizations and deaths. But this larger message, too, offended some progressives because it effectively shifted responsibility for COVID's ongoing ravages from one of the America's right's putative victim groups, unmasked MAGA-inclined vaccine rejectionists, to one of the left's, fat people laid low by fat-phobic culture. Whatever Neiman's intent, the refreshing message heard by many right-wing anti-vaxxers was that fat people, and not the anti-vaxxers, were the ones exacerbating a public health crisis, that fat people had yet to be held account for their unhealthy choices, even as COVID vaccine refuseniks had been dragged through the mud by mainstream media, excoriated as reckless, socially irresponsible, and as cranks. Not to mention thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people lost their jobs because they wouldn't get vaccinated. And then they were shut out from public life for about a year in many parts of the world. You had to, in Australia and perhaps some parts, in Los Angeles, you had to show proof of vaccination to be able to enter public life, to go to a restaurant, to go to a movie theater. Right? You had to show proof that you were vaccinated. And so COVID refuseniks, they had to buy fake cards, right? They had to sully their conscience to engage in black market COVID vaccine cards, right? They experienced marginalization. They experienced getting fired. They weren't able to land many jobs because many jobs required COVID vaccination. Oy vey. So let's catch up with Commentary Magazine.
With being pursued once Trump people got back into power with destruction. They're going to destroy them. They're going to use the tools of power to deal with them. They're going to get them arrested. They're going to go after journalists. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. A lot of this is now focusing on Kash Patel, the purported nominee for FBI. I mean, I guess he's kind of, it's not even formal yet, and the FBI director is still there. It's all very unclear, but Kash Patel is somebody who wandered around on Steve Bannon's podcast and other places saying things like, I will avenge you, and we will take the hammer of Thor and smash you to bits and whatever. And the response of people in the administration, people in the press, and others to these threats has been this idea that there need to be preemptive pardons of, it could be hundreds of people the way they're talking, from Republicans like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney to Democrats like, I don't know, what journalists there are on the enemies list or whatever. And the reason I wanted to talk about this again today is that they invented all this in 2015 and 2016 with the unprecedented emergence of Trump as a candidate who said and did things that, frankly, no American candidate ever said and done before. Said he wouldn't respect the results of the election. Said he didn't like, people, he didn't like people who crashed their planes in war. Said, he would lock her up. All that stuff. That beginning in 2016, beginning with the Crossfire Hurricane investigation that started in July of 2016, the Democratic Party, officials in the Democratic Party, people in the press aligned with the interests of Democrats and liberals, terrified, and I think genuinely terrified by the prospect of Trump, who does not seem to observe democratic niceties, coming to power, began thinking that it was okay to use the levers of power that they possessed to find ways to prevent him from rising, or once he won the election in 2016, to prevent him from assuming the White House, and then once he assumed the White House, to figure out ways to get him out of the White House as quickly as possible before 2020 rolled around. So we had the We had leaks against his incoming national security advisor. We had James Comey, the FBI director, playing this inside-outside game where he went to Trump to warn him that there were efforts to undermine his incoming administration as an effort to test Trump, the FBI director who was going to work for him, to test Trump to see how he would react when Comey came to him with this news, not because he thought it was important that Trump know, but because he was trying to smoke him out, catch him in a perjury trap, get him before January 20th, take him down. And we had 25th Amendment talk, and we had 3 years of efforts, unprecedented in American history, of one party and its affiliated press believing that it had the right to violate rules of FISA courts, to use double-barreled information, getting a FISA warrant on the basis of the evidence that was in the FISA warrant that got the first FISA warrant for the second FISA warrant against a poor schlep who wasn't even on the campaign or being paid by the campaign. That's Carter Page, throwing somebody named George Papadopoulos in jail for 14 days for, I don't even know what he did. He had a drunken conversation at a bar in London with somebody who then ratted him out in some fashion for saying something or other. They did all this. They did it. Republicans didn't do it. Trump didn't do it. They did it.
And then this is without even getting into what Trump was subjected to after office.
Right. I'm right. So I'm only beginning with this part. So my point is not, when I think about friends of mine like David Frum and others like that saying, there are.
I thought it was time to clean my water bottle. So like any right-thinking American, I filled it out with water, put some bleach in there, and let it sit for an hour, and then emptied it all out. And still smells of bleach, but it must be incredibly diluted, right? It like the little infinitesimal bits of bleach that are sticking to the plastic, they can't hurt me, right? They only can do good, probably even kill any potential germs that are inside of me, right? That's fair dinkum science. I'm sure you would agree.
There are no guardrails. The guardrails only exist if everybody agrees that there are guardrails. Trump says there are no guardrails, so there are no guardrails. So the implicit, the implicit logical follow-on from that is he's gotten rid of the guardrails. So you got to set a thief to catch a thief. If he's going to play dirty, we have to play dirty.
But this is where this reminds me more of the Harry Reid nuking the filibuster story and trajectory, and than it does this, because they actually remove the guardrails on presidential pardons by basically accepting with very little pushback Biden's blanket pardon of his son. And it's not just that he lied and said he wouldn't pardon him, but it's the blanket nature of it. It's covering almost 11 years, and that is unprecedented. And so once you've done that and accepted that that was necessary, then it's just one step further to say, let's just preemptively pardon anyone who might be at risk of being prosecuted for things they did that they shouldn't have under Trump. But the preemptive nature of it is also fascinating, because blanket pardons do exist. They tend to be used as a sort of tool of reconciliation for people who have admitted guilt or been prosecuted, for a crime that then later a society decides.
Okay, so these are sad days at the University of Michigan. They're revamping their diversity, equity, inclusion program, which they've spent about $1 billion. And they're no longer even requiring diversity statements by prospective faculty hires. How distressing is that? Yesterday, University of Michigan physics professor called out the president and board of regents directly in a public setting for supporting what he described as blatantly discriminatory programs. Huh.
Thank you, Keith. Welcome. You have 5 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Keith Riles. I am a physics professor here in Ann Arbor. I gather that you are having some second thoughts about DEI at the University of Michigan. With the exception of race-blind, gender-blind programs such as the Go Blue Guarantee, I urge you to rip out all of the DEI industrial complex at these campuses. I've warned for more than 20 years, since my time on SACUA, that affirmative action, now cynically repackaged as DEI, is corrosive to this institution and is typically implemented illegally. Although I believe the rationales for affirmative action withered away decades ago, I'm not here to argue about those rationales or about the pros and cons of policy choices. I will comment, though, that DEI is a particularly toxic form of affirmative action because of its relentless focus on grievance ideology. The effects were especially pernicious in 2020 during the George Floyd hysteria and the BLM grift. but the toxicity continues even now in the form of anti-racism. Oddly enough, though, I do agree that we are plagued by systemic, that is institutionalized racism and sexism. It's called DEI. It is the only systemic racism that has persisted at this university, or for that matter, throughout most of American society. Setting aside the many harmful effects of DEI, let me now focus on the legal, or I should say illegal aspects of some of the programs. As a reminder, the voters of the state declared loudly and unmistakably in 2006, "Thou shalt not discriminate," period. Yet this public university has resumed doing so under the umbrella of DEI. Two blatant examples are the Presidential and Collegiate Fellows programs, which now distort faculty hiring in my own college. One merely has to peruse the websites listing the names and the photos of the fellowship recipients to understand that these programs were designed to and have been implemented to discriminate against white and Asian males. That is their purpose. Any reasonable standard of disparate impact makes that clear. While it's true that occasionally a white or Asian male will actually win one of these diversity contests based on a record of previous DEI activism, it is fundamentally a rigged competition. I call out these two programs reluctantly because I personally know several of the fellows who work in fields close to my own. I like and respect them all, and some of them have now earned tenure in the hard sciences, validating their excellence as scholars. My beef is not with them at all. It is with a hiring process that is inherently corrupt and should be ended, along with all other DEI programs that discriminate on the basis of race or gender. This university is one lawsuit away from another humiliating trip to the US or perhaps Michigan Supreme Court. All it would take is one disappointed, disillusioned postdoc who no longer cares about being blackballed in academia to bring it all down, the house of cards. All that takes is one person with legal standing, and I suspect there are several hundred, if not thousands, who have that legal standing. Now, these faculty fellowship programs are manifestly discriminatory in design and implementation, but there are other programs that are prone to the same tendency. Now, I think that most of my colleagues go along with all of this because they sincerely hope they are doing good. Others go along because that's a shrewd path to advancement in academia. Still, others go along because resistance seems futile and risky to one's reputation. One might get called a racist or a sexist or some other ist, perhaps not in front of one's face, but behind one's back, leading to pariahship. One of the reasons, though, that we faculty can earn tenure is to give us the freedom to speak our minds honestly, including to the powerful. With that in mind, let me point out your own culpability.
I just wish I knew the politics of this lovely young lady here wearing a mask. If only I could guess where she might possibly stand on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Because I'll admit, I got a part of me that wants to stereotype her as the only person in this room wearing a mask. That there's a part of me that feels convinced that she's going to be a strong supporter of DEI, and I'm afraid I'm guilty of stereotyping, and that's not who I want to be. I don't think that's not who we are as Americans.
You signed off on these programs, including the $15 million plus per year that is squandered on the salaries of DEI administrators who collectively have done more harm than good.
So she's barely moving. She just moved her thumb. But is she frozen in horror at what she's hearing?
Fortunately, it is not too late for you to reverse course. I urge you to do so. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to speak.
Okay, well, we will continue to monitor that story. All right, back to this new Rony Guldmann essay. The Sweet Green affair thus served as a culture wars flashpoint, pitting one of the social pathologies of the right, vaccine rejectionism and conspiracism, with its close analog on the left, fat acceptance. So which one of these pathologies do you most subscribe to? The parallels between these ideological movements are not inconsiderable. Both politicize something that strikes most people as an apolitical health matter, positing that the reigning medical consensus on their issue is the ideological instrument of an unjust social hierarchy that polices and marginalizes a disfavored group. For fat acceptance, ostensibly benevolent solicitude about the health risks of obesity disguises patriarchal, possibly racist fat phobia, with philosopher Kate Mann attributing internalized fat phobia to oppressive patriarchal forces that tell girls and women in particular to be small, meek, slight, slim, and quiet. Right? No matter that their life will be a lot easier and a lot happier if they're not morbidly obese, but it's the damn patriarchy. Likewise, suspicious of this solicitude, social scientists Deborah McPhail and Michael Orsini charge that obesity is a deeply problematic. So whenever I hear the term problematic, 99 times out of 100, it comes from someone on the left. But apparently, obesity is a deeply problematic medical concept that causes harm to people under the guise of benign objectivity. I remember I was writing about this obese guy, and I mentioned that he was obese, and he just flipped his lid. I mean, he just went on the warpath against me. Simply because I noted that the obese guy was obese. What the hell? Do you think I enjoy being a humble servant of the truth? You don't think I have to pay any price for being a humble servant of the truth? You don't think I've ever been tempted to deviate from my wholesome, full-hearted devotion to the truth? You don't think I recognize that, oh, my life would be easier if I just make more compromises on my devotion to the truth? Right? But I optimize for truth. So how could I not describe him as obese? I didn't do it out of any kind of meanness. I did it because my life is dedicated to truth. So in this same purportedly critical spirit, MAGA, anti-vaxxers denounce COVID vaccines as part of a larger ploy to further entrench the power and prestige of the liberal expert class. COVID vaccine mandates and even COVID vaccine promotion were like lockdowns, seen as ideological expressions of the elite's haughty disdain for the cherished beliefs and values of right-leaning ordinary Americans. For Tucker Carlson inveighing that the covert purpose of military vaccine mandates was to identify and root out sincere Christians, free thinkers, men with high testosterone, and anyone else not supporting Joe Biden. So I wonder how many people were kicked out of the U.S. military because they wouldn't take the vaccine and they were Joe Biden supporters. I suspect less than 2%. My God, I think Tucker Carlson might have been right. Covert purpose of military vaccine mandates was to identify and root out sincere Christians, free thinkers, men with high testosterone, and anyone else not supporting Joe Biden. My God, what if Tucker was right about that? There's Rony Guldmann here. The right doesn't have a monopoly on anti-vaccine sentiment. There was always a strain of green vaccine rejectionism, channeling the spirit of 1960s hippiedom with its reverence for the natural. But in the wake of COVID, most of the energy now comes from the right, not from the crunchy granola types. So I never knew what crunchy granola meant. But I was at a Friday night meal, and this young woman mentioned she was crunchy granola, and she mentioned that she'd been arrested in the back of her car having lesbian sex. And then I went back to her place, and I learned what crunchy granola really meant. So it was the first time that I'd met someone and then gone back to her place that same evening. I'm a very traditional guy. I don't know if you realize this, but I'm a very respectable man. I'm not normally that easy, right? I'm not some kind of cheap floozy that you can just smile at and pay a few compliments and then lead me back to your place expecting, all sorts of athletic performances. Right? For me, matters of intimacy have a huge spiritual component. They're a matter of holiness. They're a matter of God's will. They're a matter of, what's best for society. Right? I'm a very respectable man. And so normally women have to work a lot harder than simply invite me back to their place. But even I'm weak at times. But this was a long time ago. Okay, COVID vaccines were resisted less out of an abiding belief in natural remedies and holistic health than out of suspicion of liberal elites, globalists, and experts. So is that any anti-vaxxers in the chat? California, the birthplace of 1960s counterculture, Doesn't have a Surgeon General spuriously warning that mRNA vaccines endanger the integrity of our DNA. Well, they put fluoride in our water, which is impurifying our vital bodily fluids. What do you have to say about that? Yet that is precisely the situation in Ron DeSantis' Florida, where crank doctor Joseph Lapido occupies that post. I believe this crank doctor is African American and therefore is not a crank. Former Republican Congressman Madison Cawthorn. So he was the guy who was in a wheelchair, and he warned that the Biden administration's door-to-door outreach urging COVID vaccination augured a totalitarian future. They could then go door-to-door to take your guns. They could go door-to-door to take your Bibles. Yeah, first they mandate COVID vaccines. Next thing, they're going to show up at your house demanding your Bibles. So COVID vaccines were for MAGA populists just another tendril of a liberal elite rule to be resisted not only for their intrinsic dangers, but also as harbingers of further usurpations. Just the latest assault on the freedom-loving sensibilities, indeed the vitality, the vital bodily essence of ordinary soul-to-the-earth Americans. So Dr. Simone Gold, who was frequently on Dennis Prager's show, who was frequently praised by Dennis Prager, the leader of America's Frontline Doctors, a fringe medical association that agitated to discredit COVID vaccines and promote hydroxychloroquine. And wasn't she caught up? Oh, she was among those in the January 6th insurrection. And she would later make appearances at Michael Flynn's Reawaken American tour. Have you ever gone to a Michael Flynn Reawaken American tour? A reimagining of America's long tradition of religious great awakenings, centered on veneration of the Orange One. Well, I am a product of a religious great awakening. I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist. Seventh-day Adventists came out of the William Miller religious awakening that thought that Jesus was coming back to earth on Yom Kippur, 1844. Didn't quite work out that way, but here I am. But more importantly, here you are. And we get to share this moment together.
We need some sort of healing on, whether that's draft dodgers en masse, large groups of people who've done something that later on the country decides this is too divisive. We're gonna fix this. But they have admitted guilt in some cases. They've served time in most cases for and then they receive the pardon. This is quite different. This is a form of insurance for people who work for Democratic administrations. It's saying whatever you do during a president's administration, we're going to protect you on our way out. It's opening a door, which of course Trump will walk right through because why wouldn't he? It's opening a door to allow any incoming administration to have this form of insurance, which would allow people who work for that administration to assume a kind of reckless posture with regard to what following the rule of law.
See, I think it's very worthwhile that we're talking about it today because I think the story's changed a bit since yesterday in a kind of subtle way. Yesterday, kind of all we knew.
My water still smells of bleach from cleaning out my water bottle. That's a good thing, right?
Was Politico had reported that the administration was talking about this preemptive pardon. Supposedly, Biden wasn't aware of it yet. And it came right on the heels of the Hunter broad pardon, which a lot of Democrats were distressed about and the media was distressed about. But today you have Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times in favor of it. Today's beginning the sort of normalization of it, the acceptance of it. And aside from that being a bad thing in and of itself, it tells me that liberals are right off the bat not ingesting any of the lessons of the 2024 election. The main one being the American people don't want your hysteria. Stop. Take a breath. As John says, keep your powder dry.
I think, Seth, A brings up an important thing, and we talked about this during 2024, and there was this subtle shift. For 8 years, Trump was the disruptive X factor, abnormal presence in American political life. Behaved in new ways, did new things. A lot of people liked it. A lot of people were extraordinarily unnerved by it. Then we had this once in a century pandemic crisis that seemed ill-suited to disruption and breaking. That what you needed was somebody calming and soothing and seeming to be in control and cool and collected because we were in the crisis, and he failed at that. And Biden said, I'm normal, and went. And then there was this flip in 2023, 2024, in which over the course of those 18 months, really, Trump started seeming the more normal of the two candidates, and the Republican platform started seeming the more normal of the two approaches to what the future would be. It wasn't a senile guy. It wasn't a swap out with no vote of a candidate. It wasn't boys should play in girls' sports. It wasn't 15,000 other things. Trump was there for they, them, I'm for you. I don't like all of this crime coming over the border. You know, your taxes are too high, inflation is too high. I'm gonna try to fix things and make them better. That's a normal political message, right? So as Abe says, the Republicans win the election, and the Democrats say, fascism is upon us. We better pardon ourselves.
Right. And it's continuing also in a funny way, because during the transition, we don't have a president who's, really all there. And Kamala, I think everybody's a bit surprised by just how much she has disappeared. She made that one video. It was a disaster, and she's been hidden away.
Well, you call it a disaster. I could watch it on a loop 24 hours a day.
Fair enough. She's, the president's being hidden in the attic and the vice president's being hidden in the basement. There's something very weird about that situation.
Are you calling Africa an attic? Seriously, they sent him to Africa so they wouldn't have to put him in the attic.
Angle.
Okay, you're saying 40, stop playing commentary magazine podcasts, stop showing Fox News. Let's get back to the weighty philosophical matters that are discussed in this Rony Guldmann essay. Okay, January 6th in resistance to COVID vaccines were for many MAGA supporters just different fronts in the same war for America's soul. COVID pandemic is now behind us, but anti-vaccine sentiment broadly has been edging ever closer to the conservative mainstream. Joseph Lapido has also declined to recommend the measles vaccine, and Trump has promised to withhold federal funds from any public school that mandates routine childhood vaccinations. That's crazy, right? My biggest fears for the incoming Trump administration: lack of expertise, lack of competence, and excessive corruption. Fat acceptance activists on the left and MAGA anti-vaxxers on the right cross bridges and board planes like the rest of us, so they are hardly anti-science in most of their lives. Where they are so, that's because they believe the prestige of science has been hijacked by an oppressive regime. For fat activists, the medical consensus is a tool of white Western patriarchal colonialism and neoliberalism. For anti-vaxxers, it is a tool of liberal elites and globalists who, convinced of their own moral, intellectual, and cultural superiority, would usher in what the sociologist Alvin Gouldner describes as the new class's unspoken hierarchy of the knowing, the knowledgeable, the reflexive, and the insightful. So it's the new class, the hyper-educated class that went to elite universities, who are the last class to recognize and to admit publicly that Joe Biden is senile. So ordinary Americans could see back in 2019, 2020, that Joe Biden much of the time was senile. But if you were part of the new class, the educated class, right? If you were part of those who had participation in the unspoken hierarchy of the knowing, the knowledgeable, the reflexive, and the insightful, right? It's this crowd who claim to know, who claim to be reflexive, meaning monitor their own speech and behavior, and who claim unique levels of insight. They were the very last people in America to recognize that Joe Biden was senile, while regular plumbers and landscape architects and housewives and people earning $10 an hour as baristas recognized back in 2019 that Joe Biden is senile. Refusing to take the medical consensus at face value, the awoken devotees of each movement insist that their fellow citizens have been beguiled by a false yet hegemonic discourse. Have you been beguiled by false yet hegemonic discourses into which they have superior insight, enjoy a higher awareness that sees past social illusion, parading as enlightened expertise and altruism? I never would have thought of the connection between the anti-vax crowd and the pro-fat acceptance crowd until I got this Rony Guldmann essay. These movements are united not only by opinions, but by identities. Right, so it used to be politics was primarily about government funding. Now, politics seems to be primarily about identity. And so people would rather have a more prestigious identity than a less prestigious identity. So poor people now are less likely to primarily identify as poor, and instead they identify as American or as English or as Australian. And by becoming more nationalistic and less identifying with the poor side of themselves, they are shifting to the right politically. So we've got movements uniting around identity, which yields a rhetorical extremism that must strike outsiders as not only overwrought, but downright histrionic. Well, most extreme rhetoric, if you don't share the particular hero system of the people who are using the extreme rhetoric, seems overwrought and histrionic. Fat acceptance ideologues inhabit a world where exhortations to diet or weight loss are akin to gay conversion therapy. Now, if you have a traditional hero system that believes that same-sex sex is a sin and removes the presence of God from your life, then why would you not support gay conversion therapy? I remember talking to a completely secular psychiatrist, and he said that he did gay conversion therapy for men who wanted it, right? Who simply wanted to be heterosexually functioning, right? They were married, they had wives, they didn't want to be buggering blokes anymore. They just wanted to be heterosexually functioning. And so it's not called gay conversion therapy, but plenty of psychiatrists and therapists provide the equivalents of gay conversion therapy, only they don't call it gay conversion therapy. They just help you become heterosexually functioning. So press 1 in the chat if you have learned to become heterosexually functioning. And was that an abomination that you had to go to a psychiatrist and learn how to be heterosexually functioning? So for fat acceptance ideologues, right, the exhortations to diet and to weight loss are manifestations of some kind of eugenic impulse to eradicate fat people. So for them, there's little difference between a physician admonishing a patient to lose weight and the act of calling a random passerby a fatty. Well, there have been plenty of people whose lives have been forever changed by some straight talk. So I remember I was about 19. I was going to local community college, and I figured that I had transferred to Sac State. And my friend's dad, who I had great respect for, he asked me for my plans. I said, I'll probably transfer to Sac State. And he says, you know what they say about Sac State, don't you? And I said, no. And he said, well, they say somebody has to go there. And as soon as I heard that, I said, I'm not going to Sac State. I'm not going to any state university, right? I'm going to a University of California, right? One of the elite schools, right? Just that little bit of straight talk just completely changed my life. And if I thought hard, I could give you examples of other times where just a little bit of straight talk has completely changed my life. But one bloke I know, he got out of his car in a crowded street, and some passerby said, hey, watch it, fatso. That completely changed his life. He wrote a book. Greg Kreitzer was his name. He wrote a book on fat. He researched the topic. He lost like 100 pounds. So a little bit of straight talk, a little bit of tough talk, right? Being called a name like fatty, that can transform your life for the good. MAGA anti-vaxxers are no less shrill, some having likened COVID-era vaccine entry requirements for public venues to be apartheid. Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene described volunteers promoting COVID vaccines door-to-door as medical brown shirts. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. compared the plight of anti-vaxxers confronted with vaccine mandates to that of Anne Frank, who, unlike them, could at least hide away from her persecutors in an attic for a time. Fat activists. Wonder what life is like as a fat activist. Do they ever get sleepy, or are they just so energized by their righteous cause that they have purpose morning, noon, and night? They probably don't need to take a double dose of modafinil. They probably are just fully intrinsically motivated. They don't need to be motivated by the false promises of fame and fortune and fornication. Right? They probably live on a higher spiritual plane. Man, those fat activists, they really know how to live. They don't hesitate to invoke the specter of fascism, explaining that their heft represents pushback against narrow and frankly fascist beauty norms and values. Powerful.
The Angola
Yeah.
exits, Christine said the other day. And so Trump, he has this press conference about Canada with Justin Trudeau and says, well, Justin, you could be governor, we'll make Canada the 51st state and you could be governor or whatever. And you realize that he's sort of doing the job of a president at a time when normally you get yelled at for that. Normally there's an objection that is we have one president at a time. But there's a sort of weird sense of relief, I think, on the part of the public that this only feels normal right now because Trump is stepping into the I'm the leader vacuum that has been left. And it's not normal to just leave a vacuum. It's not normal to push a president off a ticket because they are past the point where they can handle the job and then just stick it out and wait until there's a new administration with that thought going around in people's heads. There really is. So I think that the normalcy thing has been to Trump's benefit, and they do keep going with it. And the other thing, by the way, I just want to about the cyclical nature of the freak out normalization, whatever cycle that the Democrats have been doing with the FBI. What was George Papadopoulos indicted for? What did he get in trouble for? Lying to the FBI. What did Michael Flynn get indicted for? Lying to the FBI. So it's not just that they find a way to prosecute you. It's that they find an excuse for the FBI to talk to you, and then they charge you for talking to the FBI and put you in jail. And then Trump has to.
And when you talk to the FBI, they don't tape it, right? The FBI just has self-reports about what happened, right? I think that's outrageous. You should have FBI agents should have to wear those same body cameras that police wear. When are we going to have season 2 of the 1923 show, the precursor to Yellowstone? Right, I need season 2, and I need it fast. And there's some other Yellowstone prequel that we need. Okay. Saying 40, get back to the philosophically hefty essay here by Rony Guldmann. So both movements, the anti-vax and the fat acceptance people, engage in similar forms of pseudoscience sophistry when they insist that the powers that be have either invented or overblown medical dangers, whether of obesity or remaining unvaccinated. So yeah, the manslaughter charge has been dismissed. Manslaughter 1 has been dismissed against Daniel Penny in New York. Now judge dismisses manslaughter charge after jury deadlock. Now they're discussing a lesser charge for Daniel Penny, that hero who subdued a ranting, dangerous man on a subway. Wow, look at that great posture that Daniel Penny has. All right, free neck. All right, that's a proud man. Look at that nice long neck. His shoulders releasing to the side, the head releasing forward and up. I wonder if Daniel Penny studied the Alexander technique, or he just naturally has grace, which is why he was able to perform with grace under pressure and subdue that mentally ill, dangerous, ranting man on a subway. We need a lot more Daniel Pennys in the world. All right, back to Rony Guldmann. All right, so both movements are tired of the masses being forced into compliance with establishment dictates. They argue that what purports to be the cure of dieting or vaccination is more dangerous than the alleged disease. Just as some anti-vaxxers insisted that millions were dying not from COVID, but from the vaccines that were said to thwart it, so fat activists trace the myriad illnesses from which fat people suffer disproportionately to the stress and anxiety inflicted upon them by the diet culture of a fat-phobic society. It's like the high rates of mental illness and physical disease among homosexuals and trans, right? That's not because of the particular gay or trans life. It's the homophobic nature of our society. The health problems come not from fatness or from a particular sexual lifestyle. It's homophobia and fat phobia. So like climate change denialists and the tobacco industry of yore, both ideologies weaponize unreasonable doubt about the limits of our scientific knowledge, demanding a standard of scientific certitude they likely wouldn't insist upon in other contexts that don't implicate their dissident identities. Fat activists and anti-vaxxers alike may have sundry scientific studies at their fingertips to support their renegade opinions. Genuine experts will readily discern why the support is superficial, but untutored laypersons may be ill-equipped to debate the ideologically committed activists. Both movements also have credentialed advocates who lack specialized expertise in the subjects of their pontification, but whose MDs or PhDs lend their views a patina of intellectual credibility in the eyes of their followers. And now you'll be excited to know we are on to page 6. Despite these many overlapping features, fat activists seem far less stigmatized in liberal elite circles than anti-vaxxers. Social media is less likely to police misinformation denying the perils of obesity than that denying the dangers of COVID or the benefits of vaccination. Women's magazines and fashion advertising indulge the conceit that excess fat is just fine. Got a plus-size model Tess Holliday, made it to the cover of Vogue. Was also invited to a United Nations panel on eating disorders after claiming to be anorexic, notwithstanding her obesity. What I hated was when these fatties showed up on the cover of Sports Illustrated bathing suit issue. To me, that was a step too far to invade the pure and holy Sports Illustrated bathing suit issue with their pulchritude. That was too much. Did you see Black Jeopardy, where you've got Tom Hanks? The Tom Hanks character plays Doug in Black Jeopardy, and one of the Black Jeopardy questions was, what's the use of a skinny woman? And Doug answers, not a damn thing. Okay. I got friends who have sex with a lot of fat women, but the fat women complain the friends won't take them out socially. And the fat women complain that my friends are embarrassed to be seen socially with them, which they are, which this is supposed to be just a mutual pleasure, hookup relationship, but it's becoming a bit awkward because my friends don't want to take these fatties out on the town. I remember I met this woman on a Friday night, and the lights would turn down low. So she had a pretty face, lovely personality, seemed like a wonderful woman. I arranged to take her out to a concert the next night, and when I go pick her up in the harsh light of day, she's like way over 200 pounds. Right? That's fine. I don't mind that I misjudged because of the lighting. But then when I put her in my Dodge van to take her to the concert, the seatbelt won't fit around her, and I can't get the seatbelt to sufficiently expand to accommodate her heft. And there was not a date number 3, and I did not kiss her goodnight. The Los Angeles School District was promoting fat acceptance through a video advocating food neutrality. Yet it is difficult to imagine a major public school system going out of its way to cast vaccination as a mere lifestyle preference. Whereas fat acceptance activists may be feted as trailblazing civil rights advocates, anti-vaxxers are disdained as the contemporary carriers of America's intractable tradition of conspiratorial anti-intellectualism, famously identified by Richard Hofstadter, the author of The Paranoid Style in American Politics, where obscure and ill-directed grievances and frustrations with elaborate hallucinations about secrets and conspiracies reign supreme. God, I would not want to live in that sort of environment. And let's go to the chat. Daniel Penny was holding his frame in court. Penny was a nickname in England for low status or low rent payers. Perhaps they had fat women to keep them warm at night. You never got the advice in college to not sleep with women you'd feel embarrassed to be seen with. That's very good advice. And now that I'm older, I find that much easier to operate with. But there were times in my younger days when I did not employ much discrimination with whom I committed these ultimate acts of the deepest intimacy. So if Greg Gutfeld or Jesse Waters is on this panel, I want to see what they have to say. But meanwhile, let's not get distracted. Let's go back to this learned essay from your friend and mine, Rony Guldmann. This is not to say that progressives unreservedly embrace fat acceptance as a revolutionary vanguard, resisting an oppressive medical ideology replete with classist, racist, or patriarchal lies about the perils of excess fat. Yeah, normally, the more educated the person, the less likely they are to be fat. The higher IQ the person, the less likely they are to be fat. You walk around UCLA, you don't see many fat people. So in the general population, 75% of Americans are obese, but at UCLA, I think it's under 10%. You don't see many huge piercings and below average level of tattoos as well. Leftists and liberals don't place fat activists in the same basket of deplorables as right-wing anti-vaxxers. With fat acceptance having aligned itself with feminism and anti-racism, it is typically shielded from the kind of virulent scorn that liberal elites routinely heap on anti-vaccine agitators. While most progressives won't outright deny the associations between obesity and deteriorating health, many will countenance the idea that the relationship is somehow more complex or ambiguous than we're commonly led to believe, and that fat activists are performing a valuable public service. And we are now on to page 7 in this Rony Guldmann essay. There are 40 pages in total. And the squishy liberal sentiment seems to be that the fat activists' hearts are in the right place, even if some of their claims are off the mark or exaggerated, and therefore they shouldn't be criticized with too much relish. And yet, fat acceptance's hostility to scientific evidence is as egregious as the anti-vaxxers. Is there some defensible rationale for what appears on its face to be a problematic double standard in progressive attitudes? Or does the double standard simply confirm conservatives' perennial grievance that lefties have seized the commanding heights of cultural institutions to impose moral and intellectual standards on right-wingers that they won't demand of themselves, exploiting these heights to stigmatize enemies of progressivism like anti-vaxxers, while lavishing cultural capital on those positioning themselves as courageous critics of ordinary Americans' benighted values like keeping fit and healthy? Probably more women than men in the fat acceptance movement. That does seem to be accurate. Okay, I want to hear what's going on with the Five and Jesse Waters and company. Is Greg Gutfeld there? No Greg.
The mayor is getting involved. Katie, let's listen to what Adams has to say.
We've always asked New Yorkers, you see something, say something, do something. And New Yorkers have always had the spirit and energy to come to their fellow New Yorkers. And we have to be honest about the severe mental health crisis that we're facing. And this young man was part of that problem. He was a revolving door mental health.
You'll be shocked to find out that mentally ill people are far more dangerous than non-mentally ill people. And schizophrenics in particular have astronomically high rates of violent crime, and that there are rational and many good empirical reasons and scientific reasons to keep your distance from mentally ill people polluting public spaces. I know you're not supposed to say that, but because I optimize for truth, I have no choice. All right, here I stand, so help me God. I can do no other. I must tell you the truth, and the truth is mentally ill people are dangerous, and mentally ill people who are schizophrenics are really, 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 really dangerous.
System.
Katie.
Well, I'm glad that the mayor is defending Daniel Penny. This is a case that should have never been brought. In fact, it's a case that...
Okay, I guess we're not going to get any laughs on this edition of The Five. Sad but true. But we will get some deep philosophical insight here from Rony Guldmann. Progressives were right to decry any COVID-era wellness influencers who promoted physical fitness as a substitute for vaccination. Were they? Is a certain level of fitness more effective than COVID vaccination? I don't know. Whatever the benefits of physical fitness, overweight and obese people, meaning most Americans, 75% Americans, weren't going to undo years of metabolic damage amidst a raging pandemic within the few weeks it took to derive the full benefits of vaccines. These influencers were fatuously inserting themselves into the culture wars, not promoting public health. But with the pandemic now in the rearview mirror, larger questions remain. I want to compare and contrast the alternative realities of fat acceptance and anti-vax conspiracism. Is a worldview that places exhortations to diet and exercise on the same low moral plane as gay conversion therapy. Why is gay conversion therapy on a low moral plane? Right, it entirely depends on the nature of your hero system. But why would someone wanting to restrict or refine or redirect their sexual energy in a way that makes them more hospitable to their family, friends, community, makes their life easier? Why is that such an awful thing? If you have a traditional religious hero system, all right, you're an Orthodox Jew, you're a traditional Christian, then it would make sense that you may seek to transmute your gay tendencies in a different direction. Okay, so are exhortations to diet and exercise any less deserving of society's moral and epistemic opprobrium than one that would detect symmetries between the trials and tribulations of anti-vaxxers and those of Anne Frank? Is it even possible to quantify these worldviews' relative irrationality? This is a study in comparable comparative social pathology, animated by the perverse intuition that we can learn more about what divides left and right by juxtaposing their pathologies than by debating their ideas. While vaccine rejectionism is not intrinsically right-wing, comparing its current robust incarnation on the American right with a decidedly left-wing phenomenon like fat acceptance offers a fruitful framework to begin adjudicating the larger, ever-fraught question of whether the left is truly more committed to scientific empiricism and intellectual honesty than the right, as liberals often argue. Spoiler, there is no simple yes-no answer here.
Pardon you because your crime was the FBI didn't think you were honest enough in their interrogation of you during a trumped-up investigation that had basically no basis. And then on the basis of those pardons, it's, all right, well, the door is open. We got to pardon everybody. Pardoning is normal now because he's going to pardon somebody for lying to the FBI. And I think that's an important part of this, is that it's the investigation itself sends you to jail.
Look, if there was anyone on the five right now where I cared about their opinion, I'd play it. But who here cares about the opinion of any of these people on the five? Right? Do they have any PhDs in philosophy who are speaking right now? I say not. But this Commentary Magazine podcast, yeah, it's a bunch of neocons, but they're very smart.
What you do during the investigation.
There's also a certain comfort level, I think, that the Democratic Party has now with running that Trump playbook, exactly as Seth describes, like having something to point to and say, danger, danger, Will Robinson, because what they're not doing, and this points to another piece in the Times today that I found sort of fascinating, they're not dealing with the fact that on the many of the issues that this election was about, he also has the public on his side. So there's a piece that says, Trump better be careful. He doesn't have a mandate. And that's true. And actually, that was a warning that people on the right side of the aisle gave the Biden administration early on, which he did not heed. So it's true that he doesn't have a mandate in the way we think of a landslide. But then when you break out on a lot of the issues, the economy, crime, the border, all those three in particular, a lot of the social issues like the trans issue, most of the people who voted for Trump, that they're on the right side of the aisle on a lot of those issues. The Democratic Party is really wrestling with why they couldn't persuade people that they represent their interests. And it's much easier to point and yell at Trump and go, he's a fascist, he's going to do all these terrible things, we live in fear, than it is to sit down and wrestle in the party about the trans issue, which we had another little stunt performed on Capitol Hill yesterday in the bathrooms where oh, we just want to all be accepted as part of society, turned into a TikTok video of people gyrating and twerking in the women's restroom in Congress to prove that men should be allowed in women's restrooms. So they really are having a
powerful. All right, back to Rony Guldmann. I begin with a deep dive into fat acceptance. Fat acceptance advocates have some legitimate cultural grievances. They're surely right. The concern for health and fitness can be perverted into a fetishization of thinness. Now, I think I want to skip to where he dissects the anti-vax side. Like fat acceptance, anti-vax conspiracism has some truth. COVID-era conspiracists could point to some arguable obfuscation by public health experts as evidence for their convictions. Some experts may well have overstated the vaccine's effectiveness in preventing COVID transmission, their marginal value for persons having acquired natural immunity, and the need for booster shots for young people in good health. The experts didn't usually go out of their way to underscore that most unvaccinated 20-year-olds were at low risk of hospitalization, just as they failed to highlight the absurdity of masking outdoors or closing down beaches. But even if the vaccines were oversold, this overselling was even more greatly oversold by the conspiracists, as the vaccines were manifestly effective at what was critical, curbing severe illness and death, even if they did not always guard against transmission and lesser symptoms. Vaccination readily survived risk-benefit analysis for the great majority of people, even if it was by a narrow margin for groups statistically unlikely to suffer severe symptoms. Well, 2,000 people under 18 in the United States died from COVID. There may have been reasonable questions about how the COVID vaccines could have been tested safely, so expeditiously, and whether anything could be known about long-term side effects. Those asking such questions in good faith could find their answers. The vaccines did have side effects that were statistically too rare to show up in the original double-blind tests. That is frequently the case with new pharmaceuticals, and just like any loose rhetoric by public health officials, was not a reason to jump headfirst into conspiracist rabbit holes, did not warrant the inference that COVID vaccines contain microchips by means of which Bill Gates or other elites could monitor us. For 20% of respondents in an Economist YouGov survey deemed this hypothesis to be definitely or probably true, with only 46% prepared to dismiss it as definitely false. So madness is hardly confined to the fringe. So conspiracy theories rooted in the honest recognition of Big Pharma's avarice are more epistemically forgivable than the microchip hypothesis. Corporate interests, including the pharmaceutical industry, have been known to push unsafe products at times, the opioid crisis being a case in point. Worries about an unholy alliance between government, industry, and segments of the expert class aren't necessarily conspiratorial when it comes to the dietary recommendations of government bodies, medical organizations, which may face industry pressure to effectively downplay the unhealthiness of the standard American diet. So why did Americans suddenly become obese starting with the 1970s? Yet it is implausible that analogous machinations could have driven the regulatory approval of COVID vaccines. The complex and evolving nature of nutrition science means it's always be possible to muddy the waters with tendentious studies that superficially corroborate the food industry's preferred conclusions, which is why these studies are prodigiously funded by the food industry. It's a much taller order to falsify the results of rigorous double-blind testing designed to answer narrowly delineated questions about the effects of introducing specific amounts of specific molecules into the human body, which is why new pharmaceutical products routinely fail to win regulatory approval from the FDA. So all eyes were on the development and testing of the vaccines, and for all those who said, oh, taking the vaccine is a death sentence, well, it didn't turn out to be true. Vaccines were reviewed by governments around the globe. Whatever special sway Pfizer may have had over American regulators cannot explain the widespread adoption of its vaccine internationally. Simply beggars belief that scientists the world over could have observed the vaccines helping no one while killing millions, but then entering into a conspiracy of silence in a gesture of class solidarity with Big Pharma.
Circumstances that have changed this, right? Republicans not letting up, saying they won't stop. They're going to continue to do this. I mentioned the recent Trump appointees of legal enforcement positions, right? That said,
guys, stop means stop. No means no. Right? It doesn't mean to go faster and harder. It doesn't mean to go deeper. Bloody Republicans. Why wouldn't they listen to stop? No, don't do that. Quit it.
During the campaign, they would have, they were out for retribution, and so no reason to not take them for the word.
And look who's back, Barack Obama, returning to the spotlight after tarnishing his legacy during the 2024 campaign. The former president sounding very bitter over what happened.
Since total victory is impossible in a country politically split down the middle, the result is a doom loop of government gridlock, even greater polarization. When I mentioned to a few friends that our foundation would be hosting a forum on democracy and pluralism. I got more than a few groans and eye rolls, especially since, as far as they were concerned, the election proved that democracy is pretty far down on people's priority list.
Except for everybody voted, Kaylee, for the current president-elect, but they don't care about democracy at all.
Right, of course they don't. Yeah, everyone voted for 76 million people.
All right, start with the frivolity, 40. Stop playing these Fox News excerpts. Dig back into the meaty essay here by Rony Guldmann. There are reasons why the excesses of COVID-era lockdown decrees should not have been construed as evidence of the general unreliability of public health expertise and of the vaccine's unreliability. Calculating relative costs and benefits of potential lockdown measures simply didn't lend itself to the kind of rigor inherent to double-blind drug testing. So double-blind studies, they have become the gold standard for science since science became a big business, since about the 1970s. So it used to be that the gentleman individual scholar was doing science, like Charles Darwin. But certainly since the 70s, science has overwhelmingly been something that's funded by the government and private industry. And its primary technique is the double-blind study without understanding how things work when they are ingested. It's just double-blind study. That's going to tell us all we need to know. But Rony says, well-established scientific protocols make it harder for ideological biases and political considerations to influence one's conclusions. Well, with drugs, you just have to have 2 double-blind studies that show benefits to taking the drugs. So you could have 6 double-blind studies that show no benefit, and as long as you just show 2 benefits, 2 studies showing benefit, then you can usually get FDA approval. You don't have to bring along all the studies that show no benefit. Anti-vax conspiracists have a keen nose for certain constituencies, biases, and interests, but no realistic appreciation for the many contexts where these biases and interests are readily restrained by long-standing professional norms and institutional safeguards. Conspiracism becomes less forgivable when it turns from the quotidian avarice of Big Pharma to the near-demonic machinations of the global elites, where their ambition to implement a great reset. Right? Everyone wants to implement a great reset. Everyone wants to implement a change to the way the world works in favor of your particular hero system. So this Baroque conspiracy theory posits that the purpose of vaccine mandates was, like that of lockdowns, to entrench elite rule, with the pandemic or the plandemic serving as the pretext to acclimatize the masses to the diminished lives and shattered dreams that the elite's carbon-conscious environmental regulations will soon usher in. Theory has gone through various permutations. The overarching conviction is that pandemic-era public health measures were just the newest weapons in the elite's arsenal, just the latest effort to devitalize right-leaning ordinary Americans with their precious natural fluids, depurify their essence, so they might one day lose their taste for freedom and bend the knee to haughty experts and woke moralists. To take the jab was to reward and reinforce these machinations by acknowledging the special authority of elites. The conspiracists could not explain why globalist elites would hype a mild flu-like illness as a world-shattering pandemic, when this would predictably stymie global trade and travel and the global interconnectedness upon which the elite's own status depends. So orchestrating an event that could be readily exploited to spark xenophobia against the Chinese in particular and Asians generally would scarcely contribute to the globalist dream of a culturally homogeneous world deracinated of national and racial identities. There are constituencies, some powerful, machinating to promote parochial interests under the guise of the public good. Conservatives are right not to exclude liberal scientists and intellectuals from suspicion merely because they hold themselves out as devotees of social justice or other universalist values. But there are both sophisticated and cartoon varieties of this critical spirit, and the anti-vax conspiracist conviction that the global elites are playing a convoluted game of three-dimensional chess falls in the latter category. The elites may seek power above all, but ruling groups and affluent societies have not been known to pursue this, and by gratuitously debilitating the population at large, which is mostly the stuff of dystopian science fiction. All right, let's get a little bit more here from commentary.
A crisis on the issues as much as they are in the crisis and the void of leadership in the party.
It's totally linked. Can I just say it's the fact that Bradley Manning, and I'm calling him Bradley Manning because he's a traitor
Kip
to the United
back
States.
onto the show. What's going on, Kip?
Hey, not too much, man. Just checking in with the Daffodil, man. How you doing today?
I'm good. I think I accidentally took two. I was only supposed to take one, bro.
When in doubt, just take another one. You know what I mean?
God forbid. Follow doctor's orders. Follow the science, bro.
He'll understand. It's Friday, right?
We won't tell him.
You just used the word deracinated. I like that word, don't you?
Yeah, it's a good word, mate. If we could only have a more deracinated world where we didn't allow our racial identities to come between us.
When you said that word deracinated, I don't know if it was Governor Wallace or somebody that was talking about a mulatto mongrel race of people. Who was that guy that made that famous? You remember?
No.
You remember that comment? No. I don't know if it was Governor Wallace or it was somebody from back in the old days, but they were predicting a mulatto mongrel race of people. And, you know, that deracinated, if it means what I think it does, it means like Julius Evola, when he visited America, talking about the way white guys in America swing their hips, almost like joggers. Am I correct? Are we talking about the same? Is that the same deracinated?
Maybe. I'm not really up. I really don't know my Evola.
Oh, you don't? Well, he basically is negrification a word? I think it is. I don't know if it's a word we can use before 8 o'clock p.m.
Yeah. We can't use that word, but we can say that different groups have sometimes disproportionate influence on different parts of our culture.
Well, that word that I used, that of America, is I think a Julius Evola, either a paper, maybe not necessarily a whole book or whatever, but I remember I read something on the subject and he was just railing about the way white guys swing their hips too much, and just the way we're totally different in every way. And he knew exactly what had happened. They had been deracinated, and we were totally different from, what he had considered previously as just, the cousins across the pond. But he could tell there was after one generation that Americans were totally different from the European counterparts. So
anyway, how about you? Do you swing your hips, or are you more tight ass?
Oh man, I come from a line of people, at least, you know how those family trees work. One thing that I have a hard time squaring with that 14th century thing we were talking about with the Jewish IQ, is because I have within my own, those family trees, it's true. You got one mom and dad, right? And then they got one mom and dad. Okay. But by the time you start going back, by the time you get to the 3 back, you got 8 people. 4 back, you got 16. 5 back, 32. 6 back, 64. 7 back, 128. Okay, I'm only going back to like probably 1760 now, and I already got 64 pairs, 128 people involved. You get what I'm saying, Luke?
Yeah.
And then so if you go, and I've only, it only gets crazy. It goes from 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2028. You're now back to like 1600. So we're talking about, it takes a lot. You'd have to have a lot of smart people in that human tree, along the way. And maybe the Ashkenazi Jews that we were speaking of, maybe they held themselves to the side from the rest of the culture at large And maybe that was the case. Maybe they were able to pull that off. But the reason you had asked me that question, there was something called a Melungian project that happened on the Tennessee, Kentucky state line up there, where they had these people claiming to be Melungians, and they claimed to be shipwrecked Portuguese pirates. Now you think about how far away where I've just described is from the coast. What did they get blown there from a hurricane or something? That's a long way from a shipwreck, on the South Carolina or North Carolina coast. But anyway, these claims, I guess some Yankees wanted to really dig into this. So they had some sort of a DNA project to where they dug up one of my ancestors, right? And he had, R1A1, whatever, haplotype. When they put it on a map, it was right in Copenhagen, Denmark, and then right across the water in Malmo, Sweden. So that was definitely where he was from, going back to whenever. But there was a Collins family that lived up in those hills in the borderlands, and they were multiracial. And I guess about every man in the region married one of the old man Collins's daughter, So what they were calling was Portuguese was really like black and Indian, people who were living out on the hinterlands, and then all of a sudden those places became states, So everybody wanted to see what was going on or whatever. But so that's why I know even with my own people, there's always something in the gene pool. You know what I'm saying? Even if it's only one of those pairs way back there or whatever. But what about yourself? What about yourself? Have you ever checked into anything like that?
I've never had a DNA test. I'd like to think that I don't have tied hips, but I'm not sure how much they would swing.
I was going to mention to you, we had mentioned Mr. Benz the other day, and you said you were a friend, or you liked him.
Yes, I like him. He was on my show half a dozen times back in 2018.
I think you were basically telling me you wouldn't take his evidence into court with you, though. You know what
Correct.
I mean? Okay. That's kind of where okay. But we have an interesting experiment that we could do, because I had checked in on his stuff maybe like 1 or 2 days before he went on the Joe Rogan show. And remember me telling you he had 7,000 subscribers like you? I think specifically at the time it was 7.7 thousand subscribers. But something strange happened. He went on Joe Rogan. So it got me thinking about comedians, because you have a little, side hobby of you like to listen to comedians too. But you remember they used to talk about how their careers would change if they went on 2 shows, Dave Letterman or Johnny. Remember that?
Yes.
Remember how comedians would always say that would change their life once they could get on those shows? Yeah. And if they could have a sit down with Johnny, you could just start printing money at that point. So anyway, it got me thinking about how in the modern idiom would Joe Rogan, would 3 hours on a sit down with Joe Rogan, reaching millions of people on YouTube and Spotify and whatever, you think that would be commensurate to like Letterman or whatever? So that's just the way.
Yes.
That's just the way my brain works. And then I got to thinking about Trump had gotten like 52 million views within the past month on a Joe Rogan sit down. And that's just YouTube. I have no way of checking Spotify and all these other numbers. So we know it's north of 52 million. Wouldn't you think? It's probably over 60 million, by the time you do X, maybe it's 100 million, I'm probably underinflating the overall total. But anyway, where I'm going with this is Mike Benz 3 days ago got seen by 1.2 million people on YouTube. And let's say maybe 2 million overall when you talk about Spotify and all those other variants. So my question to you is, I know the answer to this question. If he was at, what would a man think? Don't look it up, but just tell me, Luke Ford, what would a man think if you were at 7.7 thousand subscribers Luke Ford, and then all of a sudden you went on Joe Rogan. And if you're a true narcissist, you would think, well, man, that's the best thing to ever happen to Joe Rogan. You know what I mean? But what would you think that number from 7.7 thousand after if it is a transformative experience, what should it shoot up to? You know, what should it shoot up to 3 days later? What would be your guesstimate as far as a number if the starting place is 7.7 thousand?
21,000.
That's a good guess. I would think so too. You're probably guessing 8.59 thousand total plus 900 gain over the last 4 or 5 days, which is
wow, modest.
That's not a Dave Letterman effect, is it?
No.
So there could be, there's always more to the equation. Maybe it was a bad sit down. Maybe he didn't plug his YouTube channel. There's probably something. Maybe there's more to the story. But when I did my quick Kip math on that, I was like you. I expected he'd do a 200% bump. Nobody knew about me, but now they know about me. That's got to be worth something. But it really wasn't worth as much. So what do you think about that?
It's going to be situational, and I think his primary platform is Twitter. So he's got over 1 million followers on Twitter. No, he's got 560,000 on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. I also thought to myself, if Luke Ford was truly the narcissist that he claims to be, he would like daydream about the day Joe Rogan and he would hook up at the coffee. You'd see him at the coffee shop down there in Westwood when he was catching up with somebody, or you'd be like, Joe, and of course he would say, Luke, wouldn't he? He'd say, Luke, man, why ain't you been on the pod? And you're like, man, I'm busy with my own thing, man. I'm changing lives over here on Channel Luke Ford, And so, of course, he talks you into coming down and sitting down on the show and talking for 3 hours. And then I don't know, T-shirts are printed up, corporations are formed, alliances, and it just spins off from there. Because basically, if you're a true narcissist, Luke, I would think that, a true narcissist thinks, boy, once they get a load of me, you know what I mean?
Right.
Once they get a load of me. So if you'll bear your soul with me, if you truly are a narcissist, I've just painted you, some bullshit delusion of grandeur. Give me some of them you've cooked up in your own and that noggin of yours, if you don't mind, if you can share that.
Yeah, it's crossed my mind, but probably not very often, because I have a quite low opinion of Joe Rogan. I just don't find him a good investment of my time. So occasionally I'll have a guest that might be worth it, but I can't even remember ever listening to an hour of Joe Rogan. I probably have. I just can't remember doing it. But the same thing would be talked about when I was covering the porn industry. Everyone said, "Oh, you must go on Howard Stern," but I knew that was never going to happen because I posted some negative things about Howard Stern. And so it appears that the most successful people take things the most personally. And so you ever post anything negative about Joe Rogan or Howard Stern, they're highly unlikely to ever invite you on their show.
Yeah, you're out of the club for sure on that. Yeah, for sure. So I guess the first thing you're telling me is, Kip, you got the wrong person in this daydream. It's going to be Howard Stern. It's not going to be Joe Rogan. That's the first thing I had wrong, right? Is it Prager? Surely to God, when you had kind of got a little starstruck with him, maybe a delusion of grandeur creeped in there. Come on, you could share something.
Yeah. I've had my delusions of grandeur. I've walked down the street after publishing a big scoop on my blog and just kind of playing with my fingers and saying to myself, "There's a new sheriff in town."
And he meant it. And you meant it.
And I meant it. Like it was like a surge.
I knew this, but I still I've heard, I don't know what that doctor's name, but he claims to be a narcissist, so he seems to know it from the inside out from a clinical perspective. And these are the things he talks about. You know what I mean? It's like, man, once they get a load of me, Joe Rogan, it won't be that anything's going to change on my end. Joe Rogan will never be the same. You get what I mean? That's how transformative it's going to be. That's how strong apparently the delusions can get. It doesn't sound like you've been quite there yet, huh?
Well, I used to spend a lot more time in this level of fantasy, but I don't spend much time in this level of fantasy anymore. And as you get older, you have the opportunity to get more clarity and to be more aware of what you're aiming for. And so I have a low opinion of most right-wing media. And so I'm highly unlikely to show up on right-wing talk radio and other Fox News and other forms of right-wing media that I've just made so many criticisms of. And I have a great deal of skepticism about mainstream media as well. So I'm highly unlikely to end up there. I remember I was set to go on CNN, but then I said some negative things about the news media, and so I don't think they ever aired it. Like they sent a town car to pick me up at 4 a.m. to go live on CNN, and then when I got to their studio in LA, they said, "Oh, we're going to tape delay it." And then when they interviewed me, I said some disparaging things about the news media, and they did not end up running anything, even though I was the guy who was perhaps best positioned to comment on their story, because I'd broken the story about the mayor of Los Angeles, how his marriage was over, and he'd been having an affair with a Spanish language TV news reader. But because I said some things they didn't care for, they said, well, the LA Times has won Pulitzers. And I pointed out the LA Times was way late to the story and said a Pulitzer is a popularity contest among journalists. It doesn't indicate excellence. It's a popularity contest. And after I said these things, there was no way they were going to air the interview. If you go on CNN and you say anything negative about CNN, they will just cut you off and you won't be invited back.
Yeah. And I don't know, from where I'm sitting, if you are truly a narcissist, having that, what the Major League Baseball would call a cup of coffee, in the major leagues, that flirtation with the executive watching side. Yeah. That makes it even worse, Luke Ford. You know what I'm saying? That's gonna inject more horse shit into your mind than even I thought. You get what I'm saying? I actually feel for you at that point.
It's amazing how the most powerful and influential people are aware of anything that you've said about them. I mean, Greg Gutfeld at Fox News, someone mentioned my name to him. He said, "Oh, Luke Ford, he's a strange guy," because I'd written some criticism of Greg Gutfeld, and so very, very important people, have millions of people watch them, but you publish a criticism of them, they do not forget.
Luke Ford, you're supposed to cross that bridge before you burn it, buddy. You know what I mean? Sounds like you were burning them before you crossed them. Am I right?
Well, I don't have a strategy for advancing myself that supersedes my freedom to say what I believe. So if I think someone's wrong, I say it if they're a public figure, and I don't think about cultivating them for my own advancement.
Yeah, about the 23rd of last month, my neighbor said, "You mind feeding the cats? I'll be gone until December 17th." And I'm like, "What are you doing that for?" He's like, "Going on a cruise." And I'm like, man, me personally, I would hate to be trapped on a boat for a long period of time like that. But that's me, Some people love the idea. So I thought, lucky me, I got the freedom to do what I want to do, and he's going to be trapped on that boat. Last 6 days, Luke, it's been colder than a witch's titty out here. He was the smart one. You get what I'm saying? He knew what he was doing. I woke up this morning. Well, last night, the wind chill was 11. The temperature was like 20, but the wind chill was 11. I woke up this morning, it was 16, and the wind chill was like 7. And knowing I was responsible for his cats, I went up there and checked in the garage where their food and water was. It's frozen, solid like a block. I had to like thaw it all out and try to, but it's cold as shit. How's it not going to refreeze? You get what I'm saying, Luke? Lucky for his cats, it got up to 37 degrees, but those winter vibes, are you feeling it there, or is
No,
it still?
it gets into the 70s every day. It's sunny, blue skies, so you can wear shorts and a t-shirt out in LA right now.
Yeah, one thing people don't realize is even if you did, wanted to go snow skiing or whatever, people don't realize how tall some of those mountains are, not too far away from you. You got ski slopes probably, right near
Yeah.
Palm Springs there, right?
Yeah, about an hour drive. Yeah,
They
you can
don't-
go
they don't
from
realize
the
that.
ocean to skiing with about an hour.
I know that, but a lot of people wouldn't know that. But yeah, we've had. Is there any favorite cold weather food? Did you get any kind of cold weather in Australia? Do you even have memories of cold weather?
I mean, it was cold to me, but it wasn't snowing. There aren't many places in Australia where it snows. I encountered snow when we moved to Manchester, England. I prefer warm weather. I prefer sunshine. So I'm not someone who has a romantic view of cold weather.
10-4 on that. You were talking, and you hit the nail on the head. You said you're not really a fan of a lot of the right-wing podcasts and that sort of thing. And you're right. In fact, I had a couple here, and I was just going to say, you could just give me your just quick opinion. You
Okay.
ever watch? I know that Tim Dillon show. I've seen the clips
Yes,
before.
I think he's funny.
Now
Genuinely funny.
I don't know that we'd call him right wing though, but he's more center, wouldn't you say?
I didn't know his politics, but he is amusing.
The other one I think I've seen some clips on from you is that Modern Wisdom, that Chris Williamson.
Yeah, he's often has interesting guests.
Sometimes though, it does have that fortune cookie like, it's the reason I got off Facebook was everybody was sending each other like sweet nothings of, aphorisms and stuff every day.
Yeah.
And it just seems like his show just seems like a running that, and don't forget to eat bran flakes or whatever. It just seems like some.
Yeah, he optimizes for success. Like he follows the formula for success. He's not following a formula for excellence.
Right. So I like him somewhat, but with me, it more depends on who he's sitting down with, whether I'm going to pay attention to it. So as far as Joe Rogan, you've already told me you're not too crazy about him. What about that Sam Harris? That's somebody I used to appreciate.
Occasionally, occasionally he's useful. There's a good comment here in the chat. Did Mike Benn say anything interesting in his Joe Rogan interview? So the important question here is, do you optimize for interesting or do you optimize for true? Mike Benn is continually saying interesting things. The more important question is, are they true? How much validity is there to the things that he's saying? And how much expertise does he have in what he's talking about? So he could be saying all sorts of interesting things for which there's very little factual basis and for which he has very little expertise. And so I think it's much more important to optimize for truth than for interesting. But the money in podcasting and in radio and in TV, the money is in being interesting, not in being true.
Tell that person, whoever it is, he's the kind of guy you can tell the first thing the first advertiser come to him would be the emergency food supply people, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I advertised their stuff for a while. You got 90 days food supply for $90. I mean, it was a good deal. It is a good deal. I didn't sell anything, but
Right.
I welcomed it when they offered to offered it to me.
My point is, Mike Benz's content is the kind of stuff that's
Yeah.
going to like raise your blood pressure. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know that it's the kind of content that's good for the soul. I don't know
Yeah.
how it could be good for his own soul. You know how sometimes I'm asking you, how can this be good for your soul? He's one that I would definitely be asking that to, because it just seems like, okay, if all the stuff you're saying is true, what are you still doing alive? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Not you,
Yeah.
Luke. Ford,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
him.
yeah, yeah. You're saying if you really were threatening the powers that be, how are you still alive? Because
Right,
if you
right.
become too threatening, right, they'd be incentivized to have you taken out.
Oh, let me veer off. What did you think about that public sentiment? I didn't know. I thought that lawyers were the most hated, but maybe insurance company execs must be
Yes,
with them.
yes.
I
I've
did not know
never
that.
seen such a public celebration of a murder before. I mean, people really hate medical insurance. They really hate it. I'm noticing that, and I don't know what to think, but it's there. It's obvious. People really hate medical insurance.
I'm just telling you about the video games and stuff. It's young people. They like to have like a lot of scenarios where the shit hits the fan and there's down trees in a house, and like what you and I would call like war zone, end of the line type stuff. I can almost see them like sort of like wanting to roast marshmallows and watch this kind of stuff. That's something I'm telling you, I get that vibe because I don't think they feel like they can participate in this system and get the house and 2.5 kids and the Mercedes. I don't think that. So I think they would rather just see it burn, roast marshmallows, and then see something come from the ashes. You sometimes think that that's what I want. That's not what I want. I'm just telling you, I worry about that. You got anything to say about that? About the young people?
The less you've got going on in your life, the more incentivized you are for the outside world to match your inside. So I think pretty much everyone has this predisposition that they will see the outside world in terms of their inside. So if they're quite happy with where they are in life, then they will want to preserve the existing order around them. If they are unhappy with where they are in life, then they will want to uproot the existing order, even burn it all down. So I think people's worldview pretty much stems from their own feeling of self-efficacy, right? If they feel like they are effective actors in the world, they're moving towards their goals, then they're usually going to be happy with the existing order. If they feel like they're ineffective and that all their efforts perhaps are useless, then they're going to be much more predisposed to burn everything down. So I don't think anyone with a wife and kids and a career is going to want to burn everything down. But if you've got nothing going on in your life, then burning everything down promises to be interesting and exciting and will occupy the void in your soul.
If Trump is smart, he's going to get the young, I would say, let me just say it, the young white men to somehow feel like a stakeholder again. That's the term, Luke.
Yeah,
I don't think they feel like stakeholders right now. And real quickly, Lex Friedman, I wrote his name down to ask you about him. Let me tell you, I see him as some sort of a cardboard cutout of a person. I mean, he's probably a nice guy, but he's so plastic. I don't think I could sit through more than 15 minutes of him at any one time. Do you even know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about, and I've watched quite a few of his shows because he does have interesting guests, but he's incredibly thin-skinned. He just automatically blocks anyone who offers the slightest criticism. He obsessively monitors his Reddit and just blocks anyone with the mildest criticism. And then he just spouts so much pablum about love and being open-minded, and then combines it with complete blockage against the mildest criticism of him. So I find him very unimpressive, but many of his guests I find impressive.
It's the same thing as I do. I want to sit down and listen to because there's usually a science theme there, a scientific theme that you and I will be interested in, but I can't play along. To me, he's too boring. I don't even know all this thin skinness that he has. This is all news to me. What about what they would call blokes at trigonometry? What's your thought on those two guys?
Just garden variety right wing talking points. It's just typical partisan talk. It's just self-serving, feel good if you basically share their worldview. And again, they have some interesting people who come on, but it's a show that optimizes for success and it optimizes for telling a particular crowd what they want to hear. I just find it incredibly pretentious and shallow.
Yes, and pandering. I think they're
Yeah.
pandering centrist is what they are. They're centrists, in my opinion. That one with the glasses that's the co-host of Kissing, he's an ex-school teacher. You tell me how that guy's not going to be ridiculously super liberal, being an ex-school teacher, and you can see it. It kind of comes out of his bones. I think there James Lindsay. I think he has one called New Discourses.
Yeah.
Same thing. I get the same vibe from him. That he's got that big lady that he used to run around with Bogosian and this lady Pluck Rose. She did an excellent 35-minute talk, just like exposing some of that woke stuff maybe 6 years ago. And I thought, man, that's an excellent talk. This is like gold. This is like video gold here. But since then, they've produced nothing that I've liked. So you feel pretty much the same way with Lindsay and the trigonometry guys?
Yes. Unless they've got an extraordinary guest, I won't listen to them.
And another one.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, I like Megyn Kelly, but again, she's serving a particular niche. So now that the election's over, I haven't. I don't think I've listened to her. I like her, but I like her when I've got like particularly partisan needs to be reinforced in my partisan views.
Right.
Right. She's very good at what she does, but I stopped listening to her after the election. And same too with the Ruthless podcast, the National Review Editors podcast. It was fine when I was in my highly partisan stage prior to the election. But once we had the election, I haven't been listening to these highly partisan.
When my fingernails get long, right, I can't bite my nails. They're too thick. But right before I get ready to cut my fingernails, if I see her on YouTube, I will just dream of maybe taking my finger and raking it down my fingernail, and just to see how much bass is underneath there. Because I think she gives us, as far as the clickbaity stuff, having that legal background that she does, sometimes it is real helpful. But at the end of the day, a lot of that stuff is clickbaity. It's just a lot of that stuff is low hanging fruit. And I think that's why I think it's why it feels not appetizing enough, to you and me. Maybe the last one I was gonna ask you about is this Patrick Ben David. He's one that seems to be on the comeback.
Yeah, I've never been out to listen to him for very long. He comes, I think, primarily from a marketing background. No, I will not listen to him. And the other thing I was going to say, I've tuned out of a lot of podcasts, and I'm tuning back into the great courses. So I have all these great courses on Greek plays and American ideals and rhetoric and Jews and capitalism. So I'm listening to a lot more of the great courses, the Teaching Company series.
Are you saying that's on YouTube? I can check that out. Is it on YouTube? Or is it somewhere else?
No, I found it on one of the sharing sites.
Yeah, the thing I would tell you about that Patrick David, it's not just that it's marketing. It's sleazy multi-level marketing. It's the kind of stuff that you would only see out of Utah. You know what I mean? It's the greasy stuff where when they have to post what everybody makes, 98% of the people are getting shit on in the company. Only 1 or 2% are even making anything to a livable wage. It's that kind of thing. So anyway, I think that's about all I had. Unless you have any podcasts on YouTube that you would recommend. I had one I was going to recommend to you called Dr. James Reitveld, Reitveld. He has a Salon series where he very passionately, just blows me away with tons of information in much the same manner that Mr. Benz does, except it's not Alex Jonesy. It's real history. He just has a legitimate passion for it. So like you talk about that Salon series, I like just listen to this guy talk about Chaldean oracles or, just all kinds of stuff from ancient history, because he's a doctor from the Claremont Institute out there in California. And, he can get back there and see a lot of the stuff that you and I can't see as normal people, having that PhD and, those Claremont people, they're a little bit more insiders. He just has a lot of good information. And, because he is scholarly. He's not bullshitting you. You're not wondering if you're being bullshitted. Maybe the way you felt every once in a while with Mr. Benz. You know what I'm saying, Luke?
Yeah, so plenty of PhD people will BS you. So usually there is a slickness that you should be able to pick up fairly quickly. So anyone who is slick is usually going to be BSing you.
All right. The other podcast that I seem to pay attention when I'm not watching Luke Ford is something maybe called Broken Crown. That's that I mentioned to her before. A young girl, maybe 25 or 30. I think her name might be Aiden Paladin, but she is a young version of Amy Wax in that she thinks like a man. So she doesn't even think she's running a comedy show, but about 4 or 5 times an episode, I will laugh out loud because she says the most manliest things, and she's a little tiny woman and you just don't see it coming. So it has its own little comedic element to it. But you got any recommendations for me on the YouTube side before we hang up here?
I don't. I can't think of
Well,
I
yell
can't
it
think
out.
of a podcast that I'd recommend. It's
Yell
funny.
it out after. Huh?
I listen to Commentary Magazine's podcast, even though it's a bunch of neocons. It's just they're just so smart that they're consistently, for me, worth a listen. But
Well,
I can't think of anyone else.
If you think of one here in the next few minutes, you just yell it out there. I'll be listening. See you,
Okay,
man.
thanks, bro. Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, play a little bit more from the latest offering from Commentary Magazine.
I don't give traitors to the United States their preferred pronouns and their preferred names. And by the way, he should still be in jail, except Obama commuted his sentence. He was supposed to be there for 30 years.
That's a father's love, though.
Yeah, the fact that there was a few days ago that in the New York Times there was a piece saying, maybe we should acknowledge that some of the trans activism has gone a little too far for the general public. And even though our cause is righteous, we shouldn't have been as aggressive, shouldn't have harassed J.K. Rowling and so on, right? Then, boom, yesterday there's a trans dance party in the bathroom of Capitol Hill. This is the exact same issue. They have no idea how much the public has rejected their agenda.
They do or they don't care. I mean, the best way of looking at it is there are a bunch of people who are normal political players of a classic mold in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. That is to say, they're operatives. Their purpose is to win elections. What they do is try to figure out how to get to 50+1 vote to win an election. So they look at issues. They do it almost like a marketing campaign. What would be most palatable? What ingredient do you need to leave out because it's too spicy? Try to sell it that way.
All right, I want to get back to this Rony Guldmann essay. Whether the elites be defined in narrow financial terms, such as Big Pharma, or as liberal globalist anti-vax conspiracists, have an exceedingly impoverished sense for the complex intricacies of social causality. So failing to grasp the concrete messiness of all things human, they also fail to grasp the near impossibility of the degree of covert social, political, and technical coordination that would be required to effectuate their fevered conspiracies. Conspiracists are incapable of recognizing their enemy as caught in the toils of the vast mechanism of history, himself a victim of his past, his desires, his limitations, and instead the conspiracists misread him as a free, active, demonic agent who manufactures the mechanism of history and deflects the normal course of history. So right-wing anti-vaxxers see COVID-era public health mandates as primarily instruments of elite domination only because they had first conceived of the elites, the they, as a preternatural form of agency that, at once superhuman and quasi-demonic, coldly plays three-dimensional chess while floating serenely above the conflicts and ambiguities of real social relationships and institutional identities. So I don't think of the elite or of the working class or the middle class or the upper class as intrinsically better or worse than I am. The elite have their strong points and their weaknesses just like I do. This cartoonish understanding of the world where concrete personalities are blandly and summarily subsumed by abstractions like the elites depends on and is fueled by ongoing resentments that right-wing populists ceaselessly cultivate in themselves and stoke in others. The right-wing anti-vax conspiracism isn't just some mere cognitive failure, because the failure is symptomatic of something more fundamental, which is why their claims that may be fantastical if taken literally become intelligible when interpreted as symbolic articulations of the conspiracists' underlying cultural grievances. Progressives cannot fathom how public health measures meant to save lives and preserve families could have drawn the ire of so many of their intended beneficiaries. But conservative writer Helen Rittelmeyer offers a clue in her contribution to Jonah Goldberg's 2011 anthology of young conservatives' coming-of-age stories, Proud to be Right, where she explained that her right-leaning college cohort at Yale smoked on principle as a rebellion against Yale's moral consensus that the two most important things in life are for everyone to be happy and for everyone to get along. Refusing COVID vaccines was for many anti-vaxxers the poor man's version of Rittelmeyer's smoking at Yale, a harbinger of the transformations that would soon engulf American conservatism. Whereas fat activists reject public health concerns about obesity as ideological rationalizations for their marginalization by a fat-phobic social hierarchy, right-wing populists see in public health an ideological instrument of hegemonic liberal values such as civility and utility that the elites promote at the expense of the more rugged, non-institutional virtues of defiant self-reliance that gets short shrift at places like Yale. COVID vaccines were understood as avatars of the elite's cultural presumptions, which could therefore be resisted by remaining unvaccinated. So conservative commentator Lee Harris, looking at the rise of the Tea Party, posited that the American right-wing populist represents a specific character type who becomes ornery whenever he feels his self-image as a free and independent individual is under assault. In resisting the cognitive elites who would tame and subdue them, ornery Americans fight to hold back, at least for another day, the dusk of decadence that comes whenever the forces of order have triumphed too completely over the anarchic will of free men. Though American right-wingers may style themselves as civilization's hoary defenders upholding social order and cohesion against the centrifugal forces of modernity, they are often better understood as civilization's discontented. Oppressed by what they feel are the debilitating artifices of liberal civility, they look askance at public health as just another vehicle for a foreign colonial project inimical to their more natural indigenous ethos.
That's, sort of like the common run of politics in the world are those people. And they're looking at the election and saying, okay, we better rejigger. It's bad. Boys and girls sports, that's bad. That's bad. Trust me. You can go to a town in Massachusetts. You can go to a town in Mississippi. You can go to a town in Alaska. You can go to a town anywhere. People do not want 6'2" boys, playing volleyball and smashing a ball into their daughter's head, spiking it into their head and breaking her nose. Like, that's not right. So why don't we get rid of that? Okay. Then you have the other people who are like, I don't care what they think. I don't care if they think it's not fair that he's 6'2" and spiking the ball in the girl's nose. Would you say that about Rosa Parks? Could Rosa Parks spike a ball in a white person's nose? Yes. Rosa Parks should have been allowed to do that. This is what you're allowed to do. Don't hand me your cynical, craven, nihilistic efforts to win elections at all costs. We're playing for the future of humanity, and we outrank you, and we are morally superior to you. And Democrats, it appears, have very little immunity from that assault on the very conventional notion that we're all Democrats. You know what we need? We need 220 seats in the House, 51 senators, and we need to win 271 electoral votes so that we can do things that we like to do, like get more health care and provide more benefits and do whatever we want to do. And that's the normal thing.
But it's understandable from the perspective of the more radical elements, because there's now the moral grandstanding brings them huge rewards, not electorally, but in terms of popularity, in terms of the culture, which is more on their side than not, although that is shifting. And I think they, they are not performing for the constituents of the average Democrat who's elected to the House of Representatives. They're performing for the followers on TikTok and Instagram, and they get immediate reward for that. And they get Hollywood, making film after film that features a trans star and saying, this is the future. Moral grandstanding brings a really strong sense of self to people who don't otherwise have any kind of faith or religion or purpose. And you see it in a lot of the more extreme parts of MAGA too, but this is where you really see it on the left. And I think they, in the sense that they don't care, you're right, but they're also being rewarded by a culture that has a different system for rewarding old school politicians and new school activists.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say, I think the trans stunt kind of reignites a disagreement that we've had on this podcast about Nancy Mace and how she went about in a very performative, theatrical way, putting up signs saying,
girls only,
girls only, bathroom account. Yeah. And Christine and I were saying that was the wrong way to go about it. And John, you and Matt were saying it was right. Now, I have to say, I think she invited this to some degree, which isn't to say it may not have happened without her doing that, but I think she hastened it. What I'm now wondering, though, is that good or bad? Because...
All right, back to this Rony Guldmann essay on the twin pathologies of fat acceptance and COVID vaccine opposition. So talking about the anti-vaxxers, their orneriness, which liberals interpret as gratuitous anti-sociality, is ultimately the imperative to preserve the anarchic will of free man against the enervating influence of progressive universalism, with its often intrusive drive to inculcate in people an ever-widening circle of moral concern and social solidarity. This disciplinary drive can manifest in what is resented as wokeness, as in the core to transcend conventional notions of health, beauty, and ability to protect fat people's self-esteem. Right-wingers feel put upon by ostensibly apolitical admonitions to help curb COVID transmission by masking social distancing and vaccination. As with wokeness, liberals insisting on these measures didn't think they were asking the public to sacrifice all that much in comparison to the relative benefits. But right-wingers oppose these things not simply as practical inconveniences, but as symbolic expressions of a foreign ethos inimical to their more authentic live and let live attitudes. So here you've got the historian and social critic Christopher Lasch observing 40 years ago that upper middle class liberals, with their inability to grasp the importance of class differences in shaping attitudes toward life, fail to reckon with the class dimension of their obsession with health and moral uplift. Baffled that their hygienic conception of life fails to command universal enthusiasm, liberal elites betray the venomous hatred that lies not far beneath the smiling face of upper middle class benevolence whenever confronted with resistance to their reforming impulses. So by resisting this hygienic conception of life, anti-vaxxers affirm what they deem to be their more authentic American ethos against the artificial interventions of out-of-touch mandarins, lacking the instinctual, inarticulate wisdom born of the ordinary American's lived experience. So this anti-vax grievance against the technocratic presumptions of a self-satisfied liberal humanitarianism, with its haughty disdain for the hardier, less safety-obsessed ways of the ordinary American, animates the American right's vaccine rejectionism more powerfully than any abstract libertarian commitment to principles of bodily autonomy. So the Great Reset and kindred conspiracy theories are absurd if taken at face value, but if you interpret them thickly, they manifest the ordinary American's resentment toward the perceived encroachment of a foreign cultural regime, with the malice imputed to elites and experts serving to put a face on the diffuse sources of these Americans' overall alienation from liberal modernity, with its parochial moral prejudice that the two most important things in life are for everyone to be happy and for everyone to get along. Right, Trump can be forgiven for his critical role in vaccine development because his entire personality exudes this alienation. So you have Vinay Prasad, an epidemiologist at the University of California, San Francisco, arguing forcefully that public health authorities' lack of candor during the pandemic was responsible for sowing the public distrust that fuels COVID conspiracy theories. So public health authorities were primarily interested in showing deference and respect for the pandemic severity rather than conveying the limits of their understanding with precision and nuance. Right? They worry that any perceived waffling on the urgency of their recommendations would frustrate that prime directive to respect the pandemic. So public health messaging exuded to many audiences a contempt for the unwashed peasants who could not be trusted to handle complexity and needed very simple directives with simple explanations. But this patronizing, arrogant attitude by our social betters sparked a backlash by supercharging cultural dynamics much older than the pandemic. So our dominant cultural liberal class very much identifies with this hygienic conception of life. And these leaders of the professorial, professional, managerial class, right, they don't mind the experts' perceived patronizing of the peasants. But MAGA populists, they feel denigrated and marginalized by their cultural overlords. They're not capable of this detachment. They cannot take the experts' noble half-truths as innocent. They experience them as personal insults, just another slap in the face by elites, and so they are driven ever further into rabbit holes dug for the singular purpose of triggering the libs. So this anti-elite resentment goes hand in hand with anti-vaccine conspiracism, because the resentment is what enables the conspiracists to see the elites as an inhuman, Borg-like entity of which individual actors are unthinking tentacles. So the elites must be seen as part of a seamlessly cohesive hive mind, because the posited conspiracies require bee-like social and political coordination to succeed. This perception is integral to the victims' identities that the anti-vaxxers have cultivated. So setting up a free, active, demonic agent as their antagonist guards their own identities against perceived elite condescension by magnifying the attitude of the elites into an all-powerful nefariousness that should be properly feared by a manly conservative. So ordinary Americans give short shrift to the complexity of real human motivations as they interact with the intricacies of shifting social contexts. They just are tired of the elite's hygienic conception of life. They find it an affront to the anarchic will of free men. They discount the motives and they dehumanize their enemy. Ordinary Americans see in the public health establishment only venomous hatred that lies not far beneath the smiling face of upper middle class benevolence. So, triggered by this liberal gaze, right-wing populists are propelled into ever-deepening spirals of unhinged paranoia. Yet they still view themselves as temperate, tradition-revering conservatives, and they forgive themselves their obstreperousness because they trace any deviations from their professed principles to the conditions of liberal domination. They tacitly blame the unequal power relations under which a cultural underclass is compelled to operate and to effectively get vaxxed if they want to live a normal life.
Now, because she hastened the thing, as Nancy Mace made the point herself yesterday on X, on a post about this stunt in the bathrooms, the Bradley Manning stunt, she said something to the effect of, "They're proving a point, all right. They're proving our point." So maybe inviting the radical craziness so the world can see it is a win. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, look, that's a classic dynamic in 60s and post-60s American politics. You're the Chicago 7, you're in a courtroom, and you behave in ways with this irascible 83-year-old judge that ends up having you gagged and roped to a chair in the course of your trial. You did that on purpose. You wanted to turn the courtroom into a mockery of a courtroom and have the country look at your trial and say, this country is a mockery of itself. And you pushed Judge Hoffman's buttons, and Judge Hoffman responded, and we had the trial, this notorious trial of Chicago 7. It's performative politics, and it's been going on. That was really the high watermark of it in the 1960s. It's been going on forever. You draw fire, right? And then you say, oh my God, they're shooting at me. You know, how could they? You know, it's like, here, shoot at me, and then they shoot at you, and you're like, oh my God, they're shooting at me. How could they possibly do that? It's a form of complex gaslighting. So in 2016, Amanda Carpenter, other people, I think very fairly made the point that the Trump campaign and the Trump administration were creating new forms of gaslighting the public, that they were saying things that we knew visibly not to be true, that Trump insisted that his staff echo in order to create, what was it that Steve Jobs called it, a reality distortion field? Just the assertion of something so vividly that you gave people leave to agree with you that something that actually wasn't there in front of you was there in front of you. So largest crowd size in American history for actually relatively sparsely attended inaugural and that sort of thing. And then the word gaslighting entered the vocabulary again after decades of misuse. But they did it, and it was a thing, and it was very disturbing. And it was a disturbing thing to enter into American politics. But there has been no gaslighting like liberal gaslighting for the last 4 years. I am sorry. You indict Donald Trump on 34 charges of writing the same check every month just so you can get to 34 felony indictments, a check where he legitimately is allowed to make a deal paying somebody off, the claim being.
All right, back to this essay from Rony Guldmann. So, anti-vax conspiracy theorists are engaged in a characteristically modern activity, unmasking the unacknowledged motives of arbitrary will and desire that sustain the moral mass of modernity. So this unmasking, both for fat acceptance advocates and anti-vaxxers, gets the reward of feeling besieged and authentic. So for fat acceptance, it is the authenticity of the noble gastronomic savage, having overcome the artificial, socially coerced obsession with thinness in favor of her natural appetite for rich and sugary foods. For right-wing anti-vaxxers, it is the authenticity of the primeval American spirit that, liberated from the mystique of progressive expertise, enjoys the natural vitality bestowed by conservative virtues born of the anarchic will of free men, and thus can overcome COVID without the crutch of a vaccine. So both ideologies call for a return to nature in rude defiance of the forces that would suffocate this emancipation. You have fat acceptance as a FU to patriarchy, and refusing the vaccine is an FU to the liberal elites. These movements are concerned not with the state of the science, but with the social position of their membership in a cultural hierarchy. And will their authenticity narratives one day receive the social validation presently withheld by the prevailing order?
That the check somehow was illegitimately written off the wrong account. Yeah, so you get a quiescent jury to agree to it. That was gaslighting. That's gaslighting. It was one thing. It was one check. It was one payment 34 times. So you indict him for 34 times. You get 91 indictments out of everything. Why? Because you're throwing the kitchen sink at it. Why? Because your goal is to say he was indicted 91 times. It's not to say that he was guilty.
Advantage for them. They're saying, let it fall. We'll follow the podcast. We'll find our own Joe Rogan. Forget about, needing the New York Times. And in the end, they're going to have neither because they don't have a Joe Rogan because they're not, alternative media.
35 years ago, when Rush Limbaugh emerged, the AM band was going the way of the dodo. It was failing. The sound quality was bad. The only people who listened to it were like long distance truckers because, the signal could go for 150, 200 miles and FM couldn't do that. The fairness doctrine was lifted. Rush Limbaugh was a radio guy in Kansas City, came to New York. He went to WABC and said, you know what, I'll do a show for you for free if I can syndicate it. You just let me have the studio space and I'll try to sell it into other markets, and created this entire industry, or rebirthed this entire industry. Against Rush Limbaugh, and then the people who followed him were CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS, NPR, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, the United Press International, Time, Newsweek, every other form of news entertainment on the planet. And within 2 years of Rush Limbaugh finally getting paid attention to, and I say this with pride, and brag and would name drop, I published the first articles in Washington, in the Washington Times, about the phenomenon of Rush Limbaugh. Randall Blomquist, who wrote a column for the Washington Times on the radio, said, there's this guy, he's on WMAL, he's tripling everybody's ratings. We got to pay attention to him. We started publishing, writing about him. No one was writing about him anywhere else in the country. Literally. I mean, this was a sotto voce phenomenon. So finally, in like 1994, thinking the ultimate thing about we need a Joe Rogan is, you don't need a Joe Rogan. Podcasting is a medium. It's like it's one of 10. It's a medium. It's like a communicate. We have it. Joe Rogan has it. Pod Save America has it. NPR and the New York Times have podcasts that are in the top 10. Ben Shapiro has one. Jonah Goldberg. Everybody's got a podcast. It's just a medium. It's just a way of transmitting something. They have all of these transmission points. If they could incept a star at MSNBC who didn't shave her head and insult gay people and then say somebody hacked her account and then told people to throw their families out at Thanksgiving time for saying something nice about Trump, who somehow got a Harvard degree in 1991, God knows. I would love to see Joy Reid's her bachelor thesis. That would be fun. That would be a fun read. But I was just going to say, like, they could just put someone in that slot and get 25 million viewers. If that person had something to say to people that people wanted to see, they got access to everything. They got CNN. They got the New York Times. They can do anything and get 100 million people to listen. People don't want to listen to what they're saying. People want to listen to what Joe Rogan is saying. There's no technical means to improve that.
There's a reason they can't get a Joe Rogan in any case. I don't like Joe Rogan. I have a lot of problems with Joe Rogan, but the right doesn't have a Joe Rogan. That's the wrong way to think of it. Joe Rogan presents as a sort of apolitical guy who's talking to people. And if he lands on the right side of an issue, it's because in his thinking, he's just using common sense. There's no similar phenomenon on the left, right? So you can't have a Joe Rogan on the left because you're infused with the politics of it. You can't really, quote, have a Joe Rogan on the right either. So they're not going to get one.
And this was always true. The breakout stars, maybe with the exception of Limbaugh, again, though PC was a very important, being anti-PC was a very important element of his rise. But if you start with your beloved Howard Stern, move on to Bill O'Reilly, move on to Keith Olbermann before he went totally off the rails, Tucker before he went totally off the rails. These guys are not conventional partisans. Hannity was the conventional partisan, Stephanopoulos was the conventional partisan.
Hannity's first show was a Hannity and Colmes, where he had a guy on the left and he was on the right, and they would debate. I mean, even he was not like, he started
right. But I'm saying he was very much the representative of the Republican view, or whatever it was at that moment. These guys transcended. They were populists. They were Trump avant la lettre. They what they were interested in was, who is screwing the little guy? Why does your life suck? Who's making your life suck? And that was Howard Stern. It was like feminists and, I don't know, cops who pulled you over just for having 3 beers in your car. And
Howard was very pro cop.
Okay, fair enough. I'm sorry. I'm not gonna. I'm just saying, he was an anti-liberal then, but he wasn't a conservative. And O'Reilly was a populist, and Glenn Beck was a populist. And these sensations that arose in neo media did not conform to these bands that people think they do. And that's why when they say they want a Joe Rogan, what they mean is they would like 190 million downloads a month. They want 190 million downloads a month in which they can pour out democratic talking points into people's ears and have them accept them uncritically.
But this is interesting because I think there's something here about the tolerance level on the right versus the left for cultural, independent-minded people. So a lot of the people we've just listed would maybe be called populist, but also perhaps libertarian. And conservatism, I mean, it's failing at this a little bit in the Trump era where there were more purity tests, but conservatism's big tent allowed for a lot of that and still really does. The left has grown increasingly more self-policing with regard to litmus testing its various factions. And if you are that kind of, Joe Rogan, has a lot of positions that used to conform to the old school Democratic Party, but now he's stayed in the same place. It's the party that's moved away. So I wonder if, and also even the cultural stuff has now all become political, which I think is a central problem here. But we actually did have on the conservative side more of a big tent. It doesn't mean that the traditional country club Republicans liked what always liked Rush Limbaugh's style either. They thought he was a little brash and crude, and they didn't like the phrase feminazis and all this stuff, but he was still allowed in the tent. And I think that's changed a lot on the left side of the aisle.
And a key part of that phenomenon, right, is that as soon as you express one heterodox opinion, you are coded as right wing. They're doing this to themselves, right? Joe Rogan, the right didn't claim Joe Rogan as right wing. The left decided Joe Rogan was right wing, right? Bill Maher is really angering a lot of people on the left these days, right? With a stance on Israel and some of the other stuff. And of course, the political correctness and the woke stuff, right? Bill Maher is not a right-wing political figure, but you in the left universe, when you do that, if you have some opinion that becomes prominently associated with you, and it is heterodox, it is right-wing. And so they've pushed all these popular guys in a way over to the right. You know, like Abe is right to say.
Okay, let's leave it there for now.